Hey guys, it's Oluvids, and today I want to talk about Final Fantasy XIV, and mainly about my thoughts on it for Final Fantasy XIV Realm Reborn, and also Final Fantasy XIV Heavensward, mainly going up to the end of the Dragon Song War. I've actually gotten a little bit past that, but I'd like to save that for its own section, going into Stormblood later on. For a little context, I've been streaming Final Fantasy XIV for the past year and a couple months. You can actually see some of my Heavensward playthrough on YouTube, because I started streaming on YouTube as well. But I was doing Realm Reborn on Twitch, and so yeah, I've been playing it alongside you guys. Yeah, I've been definitely letting you guys know my thoughts on the game, on the streams and all that, but I wanted to make a video as well, kind of summing up my thoughts. Most of you guys watch the videos rather than the streams, so it would be good to have it in video form. And just in general, you know, I play a lot of Final Fantasy, so it's good to have perspective from someone who plays a lot of regular Final Fantasy, because, you know, the game's a little different. So the first thing I want to talk about in terms of Final Fantasy XIV is, does it feel like Final Fantasy? This question is kind of interesting because it's like Final Fantasy, what Final Fantasy is depends on who you ask, really. You're not going to get a straight answer. For me, feeling like Final Fantasy is like, yeah, it feels like Final Fantasy, let's say like 1 through 10 and 13. You could think about it like how the characters are, the writing, or you could think about it in the battle system, whether it's like turn-based or ATB and things like that. I think for me, it's a little bit of the story plus how the battle system is kind of ATB-ish and exploring the world and all that. Kind of having a whole adventure wrapped up in that one game. So I would say, does it feel like Final Fantasy? I would actually say no. Now, this game actually has a lot of Final Fantasy in here. I wouldn't necessarily say the structure feels like Final Fantasy. Now, I should also say I haven't played Final Fantasy 11, so I don't know how accurate this game, or not accurate, but how this game feels compared to 11. I would say, just as someone, let's say you play Final Fantasy 7 and 9 and 10 and you go to 14, it's going to be a pretty different thing. And just the general vibe of the gameplay and kind of the vibe of the story, just the whole overall vibe. But there's going to be a lot of Final Fantasy in there. Lots of references to different Final Fantasy games and different plot elements from different games coming in to kind of mixing together with the new stories they have in 14 to create new things. And the second part to this I wanted to answer is, now, does it feel like Final Fantasy? No. But does that mean it's bad? Or is that a bad thing? Necessarily, that doesn't feel like Final Fantasy. I'm going to say no, it doesn't. It's not bad necessarily that it doesn't feel like Final Fantasy, because it's trying to be a different thing. Because it's an MMO, it's being an inherently different thing from a regular Final Fantasy game. I do think the game is strong enough to stand on its own, but also having a lot of Final Fantasy there does help. As a Final Fantasy fan, you can kind of point out, oh yeah, that's this reference, or that's from this game, that's from that game. If you're looking for a game that feels like what you remember of Final Fantasy, the classic Final Fantasy, or even a modern Final Fantasy, if you're someone who's like, I want to look for something that plays like Remake or 15 or 13, this is not that. Or if you want something that kind of has the vibe of those games, of the classic Final Fantasy or the newer ones, I wouldn't really say it's that. It does feel like a different thing. Even from the music to the character designs to the way the story is told. Mainly because it's an MMO. I haven't played 16, but 16 might feel more like a regular Final Fantasy. I don't know. Because it's a single player game, so inherently the structure is going to be a lot different. Anyway, so next thing I have is the gameplay. So the gameplay, thoughts on the gameplay. So the gameplay is MMO styled because it's an MMO. Basically, how it works is, let's say in a regular battle, you have different commands on your screen. You have like a bunch of little squares of different commands you have. You're going to be cycling through your commands pretty much, which you could say, you know, that is kind of something you typically will do in Final Fantasy, because you have your party members and there might be a certain boss that has a certain strategy, so you kind of cycle through that strategy. How it works in this game is you do a command and each command has a cooldown. And so you can't just like spam the same command over and over. This is in real time, by the way. It's not like a turn-based game. It's not necessarily like an action game like 16 is. It's, you know, you still command-based, but you have a cooldown time. So how this game will kind of mix things up, so it's not just spamming the same button, is that you'll have certain combos. So it's like if you do these 3 commands in, you know, that rising order, then the attacks will be stronger, or they might have a certain extra buff or extra, you know, ability that you might get added. There's that. So the class I play in this game is Ninja. So for my class, you have these 3 little commands for like ninja seals or hand signs or whatever, and you could do different combinations of those to do different effects. So you kind of have to try to remember the different combinations. And so when you're first starting out, it is a little like, it could be a little dull, but I guess you could say that about any JRPG really, because like you don't have a lot of options. You have like 2-3 moves, maybe like one buff, so you're kind of just doing the same thing to every enemy. As you get along further, the gameplay becomes a lot more interesting, and where I am at right now, I think the gameplay is actually really good. It's like, it's a lot more engaging than like the beginning, and there's also different mechanics in things. Well, normal enemies have these little markers, so there are certain moves for these normal enemies where they'll have an attack that attacks like an area of effect. So it'll do a certain area in front of the enemy or maybe around the enemy, and you gotta make sure you move out of the way so you don't get hit. Some enemy attacks are just normal, they just hit you and that's it, but certain of the enemy attacks you can dodge, so there's making sure you're in the right positions. And also there's different positionals for your attacks, meaning like do the third attack in the combo from behind the enemy and then it does more damage, or it gives you a certain buff or refills your certain buff gauge that you're building up. This game also has other mechanics that you'll see mainly in dungeons and in trials, boss battles, and raids and all of that. But as you go further along, there's going to be a bunch of different, there's going to be like icy floors, so you're going to be kind of slipping around. You can't move freely. There will be like slowdowns. There will be different pillars you got to hide behind. A lot of different variations in attacks as you get further in the game. So the game definitely, where I'm up to, it becomes a lot more interesting. I'd say it starts to become more interesting, I'd say maybe around Titan or Garuda in Realm Reborn. Now, if you don't have anyone to play with, you can basically run around with NPC party members or, with random people, but you're gonna have to wait for random people to join up. So again, gameplay, I think it feels different from regular Final Fantasy, a lot different from regular Final Fantasy. And it's an online game, so you only really have control of yourself. You're not going to be commanding the other people because they're like actual other people. I think as you go along, they give you enough things to really handle so that you're mainly focused. Like, even though you're playing as one person, you are completely occupied. Like, you're running all over the place and doing a bunch of different combinations of commands and all that. But overall, yeah, I like the gameplay. It's gotten more interesting as it's gone on, and I'm excited to see what else they have and later on, whether mechanics they bring in. There's already more mechanics I hadn't talked about, but that's like after the section where I'm talking about. Next, we can go to something else which is interesting. Interesting topic I had in things like my Discord and just things I've thought about. It's a presentation of the game Final Fantasy XIV. So I'm like conflicted in certain areas of the presentation of 14. For one, Final Fantasy XIV, little history lesson. Final Fantasy XIV, the original version of the game, kind of shot for the super high motion capture quality cutscenes in the game. Not every single cutscene had it, but certain ones did. However, just the amount of high polygon models and just like everything was super high quality kind of made it so that the game wasn't really running well, and it came out on the PS3, so it didn't really work out too well. It was like Sonic Unleashed, if you know anything about that game. But they toned down, the graphics a bit, and so I'm playing the game on PC. So the game, resolution is great and 60 FPS, so that's cool. The graphics, I think they look pretty cool. The hair sometimes on certain characters do kind of have, it looks like they have a low texture. I don't know if it was a setting on my computer or not. I can check, but there are certain times, I think like your character's hair, my character's hair usually looked good when I had my hair out. A lot of times I had this Tonberry mask, but anyway. Certain times the hair would look good, but other times it would look a little, I don't know, the texture would kind of look a little fuzzy there. Also, let me know if like that happens on everyone's. I don't know. Again, that could be just my settings, but hair sometimes looks a little fuzzy. The faces look perfect. I mean, it's not like the classic Square Enix games or Squaresoft games where it was just their faces were flat. It's like they got fully modeled faces all the time. They also have voice acting in the game. Now, when you're playing a Realm Reborn, you're not really going to have that much voice acting, so it's going to be a lot of reading text. If you're someone who doesn't really like reading text, well, yeah, there's a lot of text to read. So buckle in for that. And but as you go on, once you get to like the post game of Realm Reborn and then into Heavensward, you start getting voice acting like every other mission, so that's pretty cool. But the interesting part, the main thing I really wanted to talk about is the cutscene direction, the way these cutscenes play out. So there's a lot of old Final Fantasy games where, it's older, you have fixed camera angles. Think of like Final Fantasy VII, the original version. You got a lot of fixed camera angles and you got the Roblox looking models and their little animations there. So Final Fantasy, a big chunk of Final Fantasy technically doesn't have like the same amount of visuals as like Final Fantasy 7 Remake, how those things look, or 15. Large chunk of the series is like on the older side of things. So all is to say that like the type of cutscenes that are in 14, I suppose technically aren't anything new. But I will say Final Fantasy 14 cutscenes actually do look on the cheaper side, and it's taken me a very long time to figure out why. Literally, this right here is the second recording. This is recorded after the rest of this video. Before, I originally just said I don't know why, but it feels like it's on the cheaper side. I think I figured out why. So, majority of the cutscenes in this game, you know, they're just kind of regular old cutscenes. You're standing around talking to people. But it's not because of the camera angles, or it's not because characters have, you know, they're not doing motion capture animations and all that. It's not really because of that. This was what I thought before. But I think it's because the different animations that all these characters have are just kind of stock animations within the Final Fantasy 14 system that you'll see repeated over and over by a lot of different characters. And the reason why something like Final Fantasy 7 to me doesn't look like just a bunch of vessels repeating these animations is because each character has specific animations that's unique to them. Like, for example, Cloud here is moving like Cloud does. He has animations like Cloud does. This is how Cloud moves. Aerith is moving as Aerith moves. So when I'm looking at the scene, I'm not looking at just like some models doing some stock animations. I'm looking at Cloud and Aerith. And then when you go to something like Final Fantasy 14 is where I'm kind of seeing, I'm not really seeing, you know, like I'm not looking forward to seeing a certain Ishtola animation. They all kind of use the same old animations, and even the fighting stances, like when me and Thancred are in a scene together and we're getting our fighting poses, we have the exact same fighting poses. I happen to be a rogue aligned class. So, you know, Thancred doesn't have a specific way he stands. Like, let's say in any other Final Fantasy, each character has their own battle stance and all of that. This feels really nitpicky. It feels like it really should not matter to me, but I think just the character animations, I guess you would be a character acting in the animations, and these guys having their specific animations goes a really long way for me, for it to make it feel like these are characters and not just like MMO vessels just performing some animations with some text on the screen. This feels really weird. Like, it feels really nitpicky, but like literally when I look at Final Fantasy, even like before, originally I used Final Fantasy X as an example, but like even Final Fantasy 7 does this, where the characters have their own animations. It feels like each character, this feels like Barret right here. This doesn't feel like, you know, like if you took this animation and put it on Cloud, this would not fit at all. It'd be really weird. So anyway, back to the rest of the video. There are some cutscenes here and there where they got unique animations for the different characters, but they're pretty few and far between. They're usually in the big climactic moments, not really regular cutscenes. It could also be just because there's so much different cutscenes. There's going to be more dialogue at every single quest you accept and finish. So maybe it's just there's so much of them that maybe it's harder to remember certain ones. You mainly remember like the action set pieces, or like if something big happens. Not really sure. If you guys, anyone else feels this way who's played 14, let me know. I do like what I've seen in Heavensward, but sometimes I can't shake the feeling that like it feels like it's on the cheaper side of things, even compared to something like Final Fantasy X. But yeah, overall, again, I think it's fine enough. I think it's pretty cool. The models, for the most part, look pristine and clean and simple and clean and all that. But anyway, so that's the presentation. Again, let me know if you disagree or agree or disagree on this, because like, again, this could just be how MMOs are. Like, this is just not even inherently saying that the presentation is bad. It's like, again, I'm new to MMOs. I'm giving you the perspective of someone who's just a Final Fantasy fan getting into Final Fantasy 14. I don't know how the other MMOs handle their presentation and all of that. Anyway, so next thing I want to talk about is the pacing of the story. All right, so Final Fantasy 14 A Realm Reborn, the first thing you're going to be playing when you get this game, if you get this game. The pacing, I will admit, is very slow. Now, on one hand, I slightly respect them for the slow pacing because of the fact that this is actually something that is going to go into the overall story of the game, but they do things, they build up things in kind of a realistic way. So when you start the game, you're nobody. You're just a random guy who decided, or girl, whatever you are, but you're just a random person that decided to be an adventurer one day, and you moved into whatever city you moved into. I moved into Ulda. So you're nobody. You're just a random person. So you start off with mostly just odd jobs here and there. Main one I remember is like, I think it was like delivering donuts or something. Like Papa Sean was like, give these donuts to the guards or whatever because they're hungry. And like, yeah, you're going to be doing a lot of stuff like that. For A Realm Reborn, the first time you really start to get involved in the bigger picture things is when Nanamo, again, this is for Ulda. I don't know what happens for the rest of the villages, but, or city-states rather, but it first really picked up or started to I won't say picked up because it goes up and down, but like the first time really got involved with something with the Signs of the Seven is when Nanamo, the Sultana of Ulda, kind of runs out and is searching. I believe she's searching for the crown, and you run into her. Basically, you gotta kind of protect her and all that. And then Thancred pulls up, and you get a vision and all that. So that's when, like, okay, you helped someone big there. And not only that, but at a certain point where you take on like a dark wizard, and yeah, you know, Thancred takes notice of your character. So it's like, okay, so you're noted now. Now you're like, okay, I don't know who this guy is, but we should keep an eye on him. And eventually you get wrapped up in the whole actual big plot going on. So it's like, it takes a bit to really get into what's happening and to get into the whole primal slaying type thing. The primals, which are basically the summons for this game. It takes a bit to get to that point. And yeah, on one hand, it's slow. But on the other hand, it's like, that's kind of realistic. You know, you're getting into a new land. You got nothing to your name. It's going to take you some time to really build yourself up. Now, granted, even when you start doing the primal slaying, the pacing, I wouldn't say is the best. You have a lot of roundabout things you got to do to fight primals or whatever missions you got to do. A lot of the time, in Realm Reborn, nothing is really straightforward. Like, if they say you got to do something and you got to go somewhere to do something, it's never straightforward. You've got to talk to like 3 different people and do 3 different favors to really start doing it. So one thing I'd recommend with the pacing and all that, definitely read it. I wouldn't say to skip it. You know, maybe play the game with friends alongside it and, you know, read the text. And as you're running to each person you're trying to go to, the friend could either fly you around or they could let you, you know, just kind of interact with you or help you out with certain parts of the game. Because yeah, it is slow pacing. Like there's no getting around it really. It is slow pacing, but it picks up eventually. Like let's say like the second half of Realm Reborn, it really picks up. Or really, I'd say around the Garuda section is where things start to go crazy. Like things really start to go down, and that's towards the end of it. I'm mainly talking about Realm Reborn first here, but it took me around like 90-ish hours. I'm gonna say maybe like 80 hours because some of the time I was in like the gold saucer and all that. So I'm gonna say maybe like 80 hours. 70 to 80 hours to really beat A Realm Reborn. Again, as I said earlier, I was streaming A Realm Reborn. Now, for me, I wasn't grinding on the game like crazy. 80 hours, 90 hours sounds crazy, I know. But I wasn't necessarily like grinding on the game, just playing the game all day. I was playing it for 3 hours. At first, it was just once every 2 weeks, and then it turned to once every week. And, you know, yeah, at the end of the year, after a year, or a little bit before the year ended, I, you know, got past A Realm Reborn, and I got up to the crazy part. So, all this to say, really, someone who didn't really play it that often beat the game in under a year. So, if you end up really liking 14 and you play it a lot consistently, you're going to get past it a lot less than a year. It's not going to take too long. I've seen people who just, like, blow through these expansions because it's, you know, they like playing Final Fantasy 14 a ton. It's like a top game for them, or either that, or it's like, you know, they're listening to something as they're playing 14 passively, and throughout the day it's like they're getting pretty far in the game. Now, everything I'm saying here only applies to A Realm Reborn. It only applies to A Realm Reborn because once you get to Heavensward, the pacing is a lot better. I beat Heavensward, the base game at least. I think it was in less than 30 hours. It might have been like 20-ish hours, 20 to 30 hours. Again, way better than like 80, 90. You could maybe say it took me like 60 hours to beat it. Again, I didn't, you know, do a ton of side content, but I know I did some side stuff. So, you know, you could maybe shave that down to like 60 hours. But again, Realm Reborn's time compared to Heavensward's time, Heavensward is a lot better with pacing, and that's because at that point your characters are already established. Not only that, but a lot of the build up for Heavensward actually happens in a Realm Reborn's post game. So it's like once you start Heavensward, once you start that section, you're coming straight off of what happened in that post game. So you're just like straight up continuing immediately where you left off. And in Heavensward, there's still some times where you are running around talking to people a lot and doing a little bit of some smaller skirmishes, but it's mainly because you're in Ishgard, which is a new location, so you're kind of getting to know some of the new people there that you'll be talking to a lot, who will be alongside you when the bigger things happen. And yeah, it doesn't take anywhere near as long for some crazy stuff to happen in there. And again, there's a whole crazy war plot going on. If you're thinking of getting into 14, well, for one, it's free now, so you don't really have to stress about spending so much time crunching a ton of hours into Realm Reborn. You could take it at a slower pace if you want to, really, and like you'll be fine. Again, don't skip the story, because the story, it's actually a good story, and again, you're gonna want to like know what's going on if you're playing the rest of the game, the other expansions, because Realm Reborn is not entirely self-contained. Things build off of that, so it's like you're gonna be confused if you just skip and go into Heavensward. Which yeah, I should establish that like each of these expansions they're not entirely self-contained, really. At least so far. I only know about Realm Reborn and Heavensward, but even Shadowbringers most likely is gonna build off of what I'm doing in the post game for Heavensward right now. So I wouldn't call them entirely self-contained. Even like characters from Realm Reborn might possibly be doing stuff in Stormblood. So it's like, it's not, you want to know what's going on, basically. So that's the pacing section. And I don't know how long this video is going to be now, because I'm spending a lot of time on each section, but I have a lot to say, I guess. So thoughts on the community, I'm going to say. This is an online game, so what's the community like? And you know what? People on Final Fantasy 14 are pretty friendly, honestly. A lot of times while I'm streaming, I kind of just go up to random people and start talking to them and all that. So they're pretty friendly, I'd say. And like anyone, if you know someone who plays Final Fantasy 14, I'm pretty sure they'd be more than happy to help you out with anything or to party up along with you on some days. Especially if you're a new player, they're like, oh, okay, I'll show you some tips and all that. It's a really friendly community, so you don't have to worry about, like, I don't know, people trying to cyberbully you or something on there. If you have questions, you can talk to the Novice Network, or you can just walk up to someone and ask them. For the raids I've done, like, 95% of the time, everyone did their jobs how they're supposed to. And again, for me, someone who was a new person, like there were certain times where I messed up during boss fights because I didn't know what the mechanics were. But the people in there will guide you, and there's even like certain abilities where they can pull you to where you need to be, so they'll help you out for different things like that. Just as long as you're not like randomly quitting mid dungeon or just not doing your job, like you'll be good. All right, let's talk about the story as well as its characters for Final Fantasy 14. So first I'm going to start off with a non-spoiler section, and after that I'm going to talk about the actual characters. If you care about spoilers, obviously don't watch the spoiler part, but I'll let you know when to go into there. Okay, so non-spoiler, I think the story strengths definitely is more of its world building rather than the characters. Especially in Realm Reborn, it's going to be hard to really latch on to a certain character that like, yeah, I'm rooting for this person, or I'm really like this person. Maybe more towards the end of it, you have someone you really concretely like. As for me, in terms of like the Signs of the Seven, I didn't necessarily have like a favorite one. I just, when I was asked what my favorite one was, I just said Urianger just because he talks funny. But I didn't really have a concrete one, and they all still had a lot of room to grow, really. And so the story again starts out pretty basic and small scaled, and it eventually gets even more higher scaled as you go throughout the game and get more involved in different things going on. But there was so much to the world. There's a lot packed into Eorzea, which is just one continent, and there's a lot to learn about the world. A lot I'm still learning about the world and the world of 14. And if you're into world building and learning a lot about these different cultures and different tribes and all that and different species, then you're going to be into that. If you're looking for like really deep character studies, you won't really find that in A Realm Reborn. However, in Heavensward, we start to get more characters. We still have more, it's mostly still world building, but you start to really look deep into the characters on the different sides of the conflict. You end up having like literally both sides of the fence. You get to have a deep understanding of each of them and why they think the way they do. You have someone who's not entirely in the conflict, like it's not part of them, but they're helping out. You get different perspectives on each side of this, and you get the history of the land, Ishgard, and you get to learn a lot of stuff like that. So it's still very much focused on building the world, but you get a lot more different characters to kind of root for or to kind of get attached to and all of that in Heavensward. So I still wouldn't say that it's like that. I wouldn't say that any of the 14 characters surpassed someone from like the main Final Fantasy games for me yet, but again, this is a game with many expansions, and they're starting to go up for me. Like I'm starting to actually really like and root for some of these characters, and so it's starting to go up, and you're learning more about them. So I will get back to you on like Stormblood and Shadowbringers and Endwalker and see how I feel about them at that point. But in terms of Realm Reborn, they're kind of just there. In terms of Heavensward, they are starting to go up for me. They're starting to like, okay, I actually kind of like these guys now. I'm not just caring about them just because, like, the plot. Now I'm going to go into the spoiler section, actually talking about each of these main characters. I'm not going to talk about every character because there's a ton of characters in this game, but I'm going to talk about, like, the main characters. So starting off with the Scions of the Seven. In the Realm Reborn, basically what's going on is that there was a whole calamity. Like, the moon fell, and Bahamut came and laid waste to the lands and all that, and kind of changed the landscape of Eorzea and messed with people's memories and all that. So they had a whole calamity going on. So basically, Realm Reborn, the start of it's kind of everyone trying to recover from that, kind of rebuild. And your character is just like a random adventurer who kind of starts his journey to do quests and adventuring and see the world and all that. And for me, my character went to Ul'dah, so I started out there, talked to Momodi. She got me started with being an adventurer, and I took on, some random requests here and there. One request in particular I remember is one where they were like, carry the donuts to these guards, that type of thing. So the story does start out pretty small-scaled. Though eventually you get wrapped up in bigger conflicts, like you end up running into the Sultana of Ul'dah. Well, I don't know what happens in the other city-states, but I ran into the Sultana of Ul'dah out in the field and had to defend her from Voidsent, which are these, beings that these darkness people, I'm going to just call them darkness people, or the Ascians, they call them out from like I guess a different universe, or the Void or something, I don't know. But anyway, yeah, so as you go throughout the game, you get more involved in it, and you meet Thancred, and you start to get brought into the Scions of the Seven. So these are kind of your main characters for the story. Of course, you have your created character, and they can say phrases every once in a while through text, but they don't necessarily speak. So really, I would say like the main characters are these guys. So you have Minfilia, who's the leader. You have Thancred, who is the rogue of the group. He's like a British rogue. He still has his charm and his neatness and all of that, but when he's ready to throw it down, he's got his rogue techniques, and he's very skilled at that. We also have Y'shtola. Now, when I first played Realm Reborn, I'll be honest, I didn't really know much about Y'shtola, so I'll just say she's the cat girl. And we have Papalymo, the token Lalafell of the group, and Ida, which is a type of girl who punches first and asks questions later. She's also got a mask on, so we don't know what she looks like. But Ida and Papalymo are usually paired up, so they usually go on missions together. You have Urianger, who speaks like he's from a Shakespeare play or something, or a book. There's also Alphino. So he's actually a character you saw in the carriage when you were first coming to Ul'dah. I'll tell you more about him later. But he's there. He's a younger guy. He's a Sharlayan. So those guys like to search for knowledge and all of that. And he's actually related to a very important figure from the original 1.0 version of this game. His grandfather is Louisoix. He's if you've ever seen the whole cinematic for the end of 1.0, he is the minor spelling mistake guy. The little guy, the old guy who's just staring into the light. That's his grandpa. There's also his sister, Alize, but she kind of just leaves because the Scion of the Seven thing isn't really her deal. She doesn't like that, so she's out. So I'm not really going to consider her a main character for Realm Reborn. You also have someone like Tataru, who's like the receptionist for the Scions of the Seven, but she's not really like out in the field. At least not in the Realm Reborn. So yeah, Minfilia, I gotta say, okay, she's cool enough. She's the leader, she's trying to do what's right. She's carrying on Louisoix's legacy and all of that. And when it comes to thinking of decisions, she's good. I won't lie though, she gets kidnapped like twice in this game. Like literally twice. Like it happens like this is more later into the game. She gets kidnapped, you free her from the Empire, which the Garlean Empire are the main guys you're gonna be fighting, them and the Ascians. She gets freed from them, you break her out, then the Ascians come and kidnap her, and then you gotta save her again. So, you know, she is, she's cool enough as a character, like herself as a person, she is cool. I will say though, she tends to get captured a lot, so if you're looking to see her do something cool, you're not really gonna find that. Urianger he's good for like research in a Realm Reborn. I wouldn't say he really goes out into the field that much. Well, I guess that's something that's common for everyone in Realm Reborn. You're not really fighting with them. You're not really bringing them along on adventures for the most part. It's more towards the end where you're trying to save Minophilia or trying to do these big things at the end where they all come together to help you out. And so, but basically he wants to, unite Eorzea. He wants to save the world. The issue with Alphino, and not a writing issue, but like, character issue, a character flaw he's got, is that he does not realize how difficult it is to save the world, to unite the world, and solve all the world's problems. It's not as easy as like just saying you're gonna do it and then in a week you solved all the world's problems. It's very difficult because each place has its own internal politics, and then there's a lot of people who don't share his vision, and a lot of people are going to try to sabotage his goal. So throughout I guess towards the end and the post game of Realm Reborn, he basically ended up building his own team to save the world, the Crystal Braves. And then it turned out the Crystal Braves got corrupted, and he was supposed to be the Crystal Braves is supposed to be the group that is uncorrupted, but it turned out to be even more corrupted than the Signs of the Seventh Dawn, and so that whole thing fell apart real fast. And yeah, so he learned that day that it's not going to be as easy, and maybe it's better to have a close-knit group than to have an entire fleet of people you don't really know that well. Anyway, there is Ida. Again, we didn't really get, not that I remember really much character from Ida in A Realm Reborn, but she's there. Same with Papalymo, like they exist. Towards the end, again, when you're fighting the Empire, they're helping out, but before that, I really couldn't tell you what they did. I don't remember. I know they were there, but they didn't really do much. You have Thancred is around, like he's helped you out on a couple missions here and there. You run into him. You first meet him on a mission where you're, again, as I said, trying to save the Sultana and all that. Thancred is pretty cool. He's more the guy that gets along with your character. He gets along with your character. He's pretty cool. He's British, and he has a way with the ladies and all that. So he's a pretty cool dude. Tataru, Tataru is always great. Honestly, always a 10 out of 10 character. The receptionist. She's just super happy and cheery and all of that. It keeps our spirits up. It keeps the rest of us grounded because she's not a super powered person like the rest of us. She's just like a regular receptionist. Anyway, so there's those characters. There's also the leaders of each city-state. So there is Nanamo, who is the leader of Ul'dah. There is Kan-E Senna. I had to look up her name. I remembered what her name was, but it looked weird. Like it's like Kan-E-Senna. Kan-E Senna is the leader of Gridania, so that's like a foresty nation. Ul'dah is like a sand desert nation. And then you have the leader of Limsa Lominsa, which is the Admiral Merlwib. And she's actually pretty cool. I think she's actually the coolest one, low-key. She's like a... So Limsa Lominsa has, again... So Gridania is the forest place. They live in the forest. Ul'dah is the desert nation. And Limsa Lominsa is like a port city, or like a city next to the sea. And a bunch of pirates and all that. They're all pirates, basically. She's got a gun, too. Like, she carries guns with her. She's an admiral. When things go down, she's there with the gun, first one ready to go. And, I don't know, I think she's really cool in general. So it's just like, she's cool, Kan-E Senna is like, she's alright. She's the grass person. Moby is pretty cool too. And more on her later, because there's some big stuff that happens. But each of the city-states leaders got their own different style on how they run things and different environments. So those guys are pretty cool. They were pretty important in 1.0. As you go throughout the story, you meet with them all. So that's pretty cool. I wouldn't say I have a deep knowledge of Melwib and Connie Senna, but in terms of Nanamo, so she basically was trying to bring more of a democracy to Ul'dah, because Ul'dah is just ruled by whoever the next in line of the family is. It's like a monarchy, and the people really have no say in what happens in Ul'dah. They just got it. It's just whatever her and her council, the syndicate, says is what happens. So she wanted to kind of convert it into more of a democracy, so people can vote who their leader is and things like that. And so it was like, yeah, that's actually pretty cool. And then the people, the syndicate, the other people on her council didn't like that very much. So they kind of tried to poison her and all this type of stuff. They sabotaged it, which is basically where I say that, trying to change the world or change things is not very easy. Even if you're literally the leader of the place, it's not that easy. Same as how maybe like the president of the United States can't just do stuff because the different branches might block it. So it's like, it's even for someone with that much power, it's not that easy to just completely change everything. And so Alphino, a guy who's not even in that position, definitely learns that, yeah, it's going to take a lot more work to make things change and for the better, hopefully, and all of that. So I liked that. But a Realm Reborn, I'm going into the post game, but the base Realm Reborn is more about just like taking down primals, which are the summons of this game. And the summons, you have Ifrit, Titan, Garuda, things like that. You take on those three, and each of those three are worshipped by a beast tribe. So you learn about the beast tribe and all that, so that's pretty cool. So basically, your job is to go around taking those guys down so they don't destroy the world or absorb all the ether in the world. Ether, which is like the energy of this world, is like the power systems, like Ki in Dragon Ball or something, or Chakra in Naruto. And so, yeah, your whole job as a Science 7 mainly just to take those guys down when they get summoned. So you kind of just do that, as once you like become an actual kind of important person, that's mainly what you're doing. Investigating stuff and then taking those guys down. Eventually you find Sid, which is someone from the Garlean Empire, but he's not a bad guy, he's just a mechanic. And if you know anything about Final Fantasy, Sid is usually the airship guy or a mechanic guy. And so yeah, he does get you guys an airship eventually. You find your airship and you get to use it. Sid is pretty cool. I know a lot of people like this Sid. I like him too. I don't know if he's my favorite Sid in the series. Truth be told, he might place higher than the Final Fantasy VIII Sid. He's got a lot of good dialogue a lot of the time, and he, if you need a job done, he'll get the job done. Or like if you gotta figure out how to get past a barrier, which happens more times than you expect, he'll figure out how to get past it. So Sid is cool. So you find him, he has his memories lost for a bit, but then you eventually get it back, and that's when you start to remember what's really going on in the whole overall conflict against the Garleans. So the Garlean Empire, they are basically the main bad guys, one of the main bad guys. The bad guys of the physical world is, the Garlean Empire. They're what you would expect, the Empire. They're the bad guys. They want to take over everything. You have the Ascians, which are more of the ethereal, spiritual enemy. I don't know what you would call it, but they are basically tied to the darkness and the whole dark deity. So they're on that side of the spectrum. And you guys, your main characters on the light side. You have like a goddess, Hydaelyn. Yeah, Hydaelyn. And she kind of gives you powers through that, the power of light and whatever. So you kind of have the whole physical aspect, which is the Garleans, just the people. They're attacking regular people. You have the Ascians who are trying to purge the light and do more things like that. And bring their deity back to life. And so you have all that going on. So the Garleans eventually, after you took down a couple of primals, they pull up and they're like, we got the ultimate weapon. We're going to destroy the world. And so you got to go in. This is like the end of, Realm Reborn. You got to go in and fight them off and fight off a couple of their commanders and all of that. And destroy the ultimate weapon. But then after that, the Ascian pulls up and they actually took over Thancred's mind. La Brea took over his mind, and so you gotta take on Thancred while he's controlled. And they got a whole thing where it's like you get overwhelmed and destroyed, but then the power of Hydaelyn gives you the light, and you get revived and get back up and start fighting again. And so it was a pretty cool enough finale, I think. Realm Reborn, I think it takes some time to pick up. Especially if you're not reading or not really trying to learn about the world, it's not gonna be too interesting until a bit later on, until like the post game, I'd say. And the post game I think was the best part of Realm Reborn. So the post game is where I said, yeah, like Alphinaud's trying to build the Crystal Braves and his whole group and try to save the world after, you know, we beat the Garleans in this area, not the entire kingdom or empire, but we beat the Garleans that are kind of living in the certain area in Eorzea. And so yeah, we're busy trying to do that, but eventually, and then Nanamo is trying to, you know, turn the Ul'dah into more of a democracy. And that's where that whole plot line comes into. There's that, and you basically become outlaws and you get banned from all of the allied city-states because they framed you for trying to poison Nanamo, and they had a crazy things going on. So you had this guy, Raoban, he's like Nanamo's top general. He got betrayed by one of the Crystal Braves, and he went and took them on. They had a pretty cool fight scene. And, you know, all the signs of the Seven got betrayed, and each one of us got separated as we were trying to escape. And Alphinaud felt the weight of his failure, because it's like, yeah, the group he made to be pure and to save the world got corrupted by money and the syndicate and all of that. And, you know, his close-knit group was really the better one all along. That's who we really should have stayed with and trusted in. That fell apart real fast for all of us. There was also another plot line with these guys called the Ishgardians. They're basically still a part of Eorzea, this continent, but they're super far away, you know, like they are more in the mountains. It's very cold and always snowing over there. So you start to kind of learn a bit about them. They don't like dragons very much. They hate dragons. Anyone who likes dragons are branded as heretics by the church. And there's a bit of internal politics you got to help solve because someone framed one of the houses to be a heretic, but you know, it was planted evidence, it wasn't really true. You kind of have some internal fighting within the houses, different families, like noble families of Ishgard, so there's a bit of that going on too. And then there's this person called Iceheart. Iceheart is basically the leader of the heretics, and you fight her and she turns into Shiva, which is pretty crazy. But you still beat her and she kind of runs off, and then you get exiled, and that leads you into Heavensward. And I realize I'm doing like a whole plot synopsis at this point. But basically, yeah, you are exiled from all the city-states that you were cool with in A Realm Reborn, and you get forced to go to Ishgard. Luckily, because you did some stuff in the post-game of Realm Reborn, you kind of know these guys already, so they let you live here. They're like, okay. Because they're not a part of the Eorzea Alliance. Basically, no one in the Alliance can take you in, because that would be a breach of their contract, you know? Because if you're a fugitive of Ul'dah, then it's like, okay, people of Limsa and people of Gridania, even though we're cool with you, we can't really let you in because that would be a breach of the alliance. So yeah, we had to go to Ishgard, someone from outside the alliance, to take us in. And we already know this guy called Harshaphant. He was kind of our gateway into that family that we got to live with for the time being. And so the only ones left from our group that made it out was our character, Alphinaud, and Tataru. So that's kind of the main party for a bit. As you travel into the mountains, into Ishgard. And basically, you are trying to get yourselves back on your feet, and Alphinaud basically has to take this time to grow and really to redeem himself. And this is also, in Heavensward, you get fully new voice actors, so it sounds like with his character development, his voice got deeper, which is pretty funny. But yeah, so basically this arc is kind of like a redemption arc for Alphinaud after he kind of really failed and messed up in that post-game. And so that's when I really started to like Alphinaud. So I actually would say Alphinaud might be my favorite Scion of the Seven right now, because he really stepped up for this entire Heavensward thing. He did a lot more helping than he ever did with the Crystal Braves, with just this small group of me, him, and Tataru. And, you know, he's become a lot stronger for it. And I wouldn't say a leader, but he's like someone who is very good at thinking of different things to do. And, you know, now he knows that also sometimes you can't just fix things. Sometimes there's got to be a little conflict to move forward. But, so yeah, I liked his character development. Alphinaud definitely has gotten a lot stronger. Tataru is great already, but yeah, more Tataru. She basically is trying to gather information about the people of Ishgard and any rumors that comes across. Because we're still kind of keeping an ear out for if we hear anything about the other signs of the Seven. We're keeping an ear out, but, you know, we don't have a lot of luck. But basically, we're trying to help Ishgard with their conflict. Since we're living with them, so it's like, might as well help them out. Maybe if we help them out, they want to join the Eorzea Alliance. Because when the whole war happened with the Garleans, they did not help anyone else in Eorzea. They were just chilling up in their mountain because they're like, this has nothing to do with us, so we're not helping you guys. So they're, that's why they're not part of the alliance. So we're kind of like partially using this to maybe get them into the alliance. Like if we help them out a lot, maybe they'll come and join us. So basically, we meet more people, part of the house that we are living in, House Four Toms, I believe it's called. They got this younger brother, this older brother, and you got the head of the house, and he's actually a narrator for this section, so which is pretty cool. In Heavensward, you have a narrator as you get to new areas, and it's talking about how your group is journeying and how they feel and all of that. And so you meet a couple new characters. I believe you didn't meet him before Heavensward, but you don't really get to know him until now. So you have Estinian, which is a dragoon, which if you play Final Fantasy, you know about the dragoons. So you got a dragoon, and then you have this guy called Amaric, and he's like a high-up official of Ishgard. He's not the leader, but he's like the leader of I guess the military. You have Lucia, which is like his assistant, and then you have the King Thordan. Well, maybe not king. I don't know. I don't remember what specifically they called him. But he's basically the leader of Ishgard. Thordan. He's like the leader of the church and all that. And so yeah, their whole thing is the dragons apparently started a war with them, the Dragon Song War, and the church is like, we hate the dragons. Yeah, so it's just the Ishgardians are trying to fight the dragons, and like, yeah, it's literal dragon. It's not like dragon anthropomorphic people. Like literally, it's just like straight up dragons are coming around. So, but the dragons can speak. They're actually intelligent. And so yeah, basically you kind of start to help out the Ishgardians. So in this section, it feels slightly similar to earlier Realm Reborn, but also a bit better because for one, it doesn't take as long. But also, you're kind of a known figure, so it's more like you're learning about the other people in Ishgard. So again, you start to learn about the characters and their different dynamics and personalities and all that. And yeah, so you learn more about them. There's some more beastmen here. They call forth Bismarck. So, that stuff. But you don't take care of it immediately because you are very understaffed. You've got like 2 people there. You do not have the entire size of the 7 like you used to. So you hold that off for later. Eventually, you and Estinian run into Iceheart again, which is the leader of the heretics. And she is trying to tell you that, like, oh, I'm not the bad guy here, you guys are, and all that type of stuff. And so we try to find more information. And eventually she starts to say that, like, it wasn't the dragons that started the war, it was actually the humans that did. Or not necessarily that, it was more like she was mainly saying that she's trying to end the war. The reason she is with the dragons and helping them out is because she's trying to end the war. And so eventually we're like, okay, you know what? We will journey to the dragons with you. We'll see if we can negotiate to end the war, because nobody wants this war. It's a war. Nobody likes war. And so we take your character, Alphino. So you have Alphino, who's more like a neutral position person. He's not Ishgardian. He's not a dragon. It's a neutral party more so. You've got Estinian, who is very heavy on the Ishgardian side. He wants to kill dragons. They killed his family, so he's like, I just want to kill a bunch of dragons. He also has the eye of a dragon called Nidhogg, so keep that in mind, but that eye gives him power, basically. So you have that side of things where he's like, I just want to kill the dragons. I hate them. They killed my family. You have the other side, Iceheart, or Isael, and she is sympathetic to the dragons. She has a piece of Shiva, as you saw. But yeah, she's sympathetic to the dragons. She doesn't necessarily hate the Ishgardians, but it's more like she's sympathetic to the dragons. She's like, we need to end the war. And so yeah, you have both sides of the spectrum, and then you have a neutral party, which is pretty cool. So it makes for good dynamics in the conversations. Estinian is still kind of open to like, okay, if the negotiations work, then like, all right, we'll end the war. But anything goes wrong, I will not hesitate to kill the dragon right there. So he's ready to go. He's still ready to launch his attack. Like, he is at a moment's notice. He'll just kill the dragon. He doesn't care. So anyway, we kind of journey through the world of the dragons. A lot of other stuff that happens. But we get to the dragon and we find out that yeah, it was in fact the Ishgardians that started the war. A long ancestor of Ishgardians. So they found out that well, before that, the Ishgardians and the dragons actually had a peace treaty at one point. They were cool with each other. So Shiva, this woman, Ishgardian woman, Shiva, basically made a deal with the dragon. They got into a relationship, which is okay. That's kind of weird. But you know what I mean? Like they joined, they became one, and so their two peoples also became one. They made a promise, and they were like, yeah, our two peoples will be at peace. We won't fight each other, try to kill each other. But then some Ishgardians caught wind of some information that the dragon eyes hold a lot of power. If you get their eyes, you will get a huge power up. So they were like, we're gonna go take their eyes. And so I mentioned Nidhogg earlier. Nidhogg's sister, another dragon, they took her eyes and killed her. And they got the power up. And Nidhogg was mad. And then they took Nidhogg's eyes. And so, yeah, he was pretty mad about that. And he's like, you killed my sister and stole her eyes and stole my eyes. So I'm declaring war on all of you. That's it. Like, I'm done. Because, like, I mean, yeah. If anyone did that to anyone's sister and them, like, yeah, they're gonna want blood. They're not too happy about that. But the Ishgardians kind of twisted the story a bit, so it's like, yeah, no, we didn't do anything. It was the dragons who started randomly attacking us one day, and so that's why the whole war started and why it's still going on. And Ishgardians are kind of gassed up on propaganda, basically. What makes the situation kind of tricky is that humans did start the war, and like, yeah, they're at war, so people will die, and so yeah, it's like. Because even though, yeah, it's not even the dragons are just retaliating for what the humans did, but it's also like for people like Estinian who lost their family to the dragon in this war, and Estinian never did anything himself, so for him it's still gonna be hard. It's like they killed my family, So it's like I don't exactly, I'm not cool with them still. I don't really like them that much. They killed my family. I know why they did it, but like I still kind of don't like that they killed my family. So I think that's really cool how that has a bit of a tricky thing going on. You go to this guy called Hrausvelgr, who is a dragon. That was the dragon that Shiva had joined with. You go to ask him, like, hey, can you tell Nidhogg to stop the war? And he's like, no. Nidhogg is not trying to stop the war. I'm kind of like, I don't think he's necessarily wrong for starting the war, because, like, you did kill our sister and take his eyes, so, I mean, you kind of messed up. That's on you guys. And, they're like, oh, well, that was such a long time ago, but these are dragons, and dragons live a lot longer than humans. So they're like, yeah, maybe for you guys that was a long time ago. For our perspective, that was like it was yesterday. It was maybe I forgot if it was a couple 100 years or 1,000 years, but it was like, yeah, for us, that's not that long. It still feels like those wounds are still fresh. And so Nidhogg is not stopping the war because he's still grieving over his sister. So basically, yeah, like our mission had failed and Ashar was heartbroken and all that. She tried to appeal using the Shiva thing that she has, but it's like she's not really Shiva. It turns out that Shiva she's got is a fake. So anyway, yeah. Eventually, you're like, okay, I guess we're just gonna have to kill Nidhogg then, because he's not stopping the war. And yeah, we do just that. We go beat him up. We beat up Nidhogg. And Estinian gets his other eye, Nidhogg's other eye. And he's like, cool, I'm a super cool Crimson Knight. I have more power. Awesome. And then eventually, it turns out having both of those eyes are not too good. It corrupted him and transformed him into a dragon, basically. He basically ended up furthering Nidhogg's rage. Partially fueled, seeping off of his own rage by his family dying. So it's like they both have the same motivation, really. There's a whole separate assault. And so right as we're about to unite the dragons, Nidhogg comes in and is like, nah, bro, we're not doing that. I'm out for blood. We're putting the war back on. And you have to basically take him down again. You get the help of Hrausvelgr. It takes some convincing, but you eventually get his help to join in. Meanwhile, Thoradin, remember Thoradin, the guy who's the leader of Ishgard? He is basically trying to get this ancient Allagan technology, which the Allagans are like like the ancient race that has advanced technology, that type of trope. It's basically those guys, yeah. So he's trying to get their ancient technology to go and wipe out the dragons, because he's like, yeah, that's what us Ishgardians do. We kill dragons. So he's like, I'm going to go and eradicate all the dragons from existence. And so first we stop him and the Heavensward. The Heavensward are like this group of guys, his like elite royal family. Not royal family, royal guard. And they all have like a transformation, which is pretty crazy. So we got to stop him. In the process, our friend from earlier, Hershafont, dies, saving us. So we take down Thoradin, and then we got to go take down Nidhogg, and we do just that. That is overall the Dragon Song conflict. We also had Asael, Iceheart, who sacrificed herself to help our character, Alphino, Sid, and all our guys to get past into where we have to take down Thornton. A lot of stuff happened, but yeah, people died. 2 people died on our journey. 2 pretty cool people. Actually, a 3rd person died. There was a character I didn't mention from the Reborn postgame, but she died as well. She was introduced in that postgame and then died in that as well. She was like Ariandre's friend. Again, I despite me talking for like 40 minutes about the story, I actually didn't talk about every single detail in the story, just like the main points. But yeah, so we fight Thornton. He was working with Ascian, fight the Ascian. And eventually, we finally defeat Nidhogg. And not only that, yeah, we beat Nidhogg, but tensions are rising in Ishgard because, again, not everyone's on board with teaming up with dragons or making a peace treaty because, I mean, yeah, their families died. All it took was one mistake from one of the House 4 Tomps guys, and he accidentally caused one of them to get shot by an arrow, one of the protesters, and then that caused a whole situation. I like that they have that because that's the thing that happens, or like when tensions are rising between 2 people, all it takes, and he didn't mean to like kill it. He didn't mean to order the guy to kill her. He just like in a panic, he just told his soldier like stop her, and he ended up shooting her with an arrow. And yeah, that's pretty realistic. It's like all it takes is one tiny mistake, and it is over. Like you're gonna cause so much conflict and strife between even your own people. One thing I will say was a bit of a surprising move. I don't know if I'm completely on board with the strategy of like completely solving this crazy conflict I just mentioned between Ishgardians. So basically, they had a battle royale with Ishgard and the other Eorzean Alliance guys, and when the Ishgard won, everyone was cool with what Ishgard was doing. I don't really know how it works. I won't lie. I understand the aspect of like, I guess the sort of, pride in your country and nationalism, but I don't know if that was necessarily the problem. It was more like people don't want to unify with someone who killed their families, even if they killed their families because their families were killed first. So I think they could have handled that part specifically better. It was kind of funny. They could have handled that a bit better, but, yeah. And eventually Ishgard decides to join the Eorzean Alliance, so that's pretty cool. We did that at least. Eventually, we solved the whole situation. Ulda Nanamo is revealed to be alive, and sets things right, at the very least back to normal from how they used to be. So we're all pardoned. Yeah, so that is pretty much the Dragon Song War. So this is another plot point, but I'm going to save that for next time I talk about like Stormblood or something. It's still technically Heavensward, but it's like the post game, and it's like that I think is going to branch off to a whole different thing. I'm going to say that. Basically, yeah, that is the Dragon Song War. I like the Dragon Song War a lot better than Reborn. Heavensward is actually pretty cool. There is more characters. Ishtola comes back eventually, and Thancred comes back. Eventually, everyone comes back, but I'm mainly going to get into Alphino's growth. Alphino had great growth throughout this whole thing, and he's much stronger for it now, and yeah, he's someone that you can really depend on. Aymeric is pretty cool. He's also voiced by the same guy who voices Alvis from Xenoblade, so that's pretty cool. I didn't really talk much about his character, but he is someone who, one of the leaders who, upon finding out the truth, decides that like the people gotta know the truth and all that. So he was pretty cool. He was advocating for the war to end. Estinian is cool. He got corrupted, but he wanted to kill the dragons, but he still is able to have a level head. He isn't just the type to blindly rage out and ignore any nuance to the situation. So I like that. He's not an idiot. Iceheart was good too. She wanted to end the war as well, but she, the dragons were not as peaceful. Like she thought like if we just like talk it out, then we'll be good. But like no, the dragons wanted blood, and that was cool for her to find out. So crazy stuff all around. But yeah, I liked the characters. There's maybe a character or two I didn't mention. There's a House 4 Tomps sons. One of them is the one who ended up accidentally getting one of the protesters killed and all that. So yeah, that was cool. They had a little arc with him. Yeah, I guess Thancred is part of that arc with him, so I guess I'll mention Thancred came back as well, and he was just out in the wilderness, and he got way stronger and took on some strong enemies. I won't get into who. I'm gonna save that for Stormblood, because for all I know, those enemies might come back in Stormblood, and so for all I know, I might only really have half the story with that section of it, so I'm not really gonna go into that right now. But that has been the story and the characters of Reborn and Heavensward. And this is kind of insane because this is like 40 minutes. It's going to be a lot of editing for me, but yeah. So I definitely like Heavensward. I like Heavensward, and if the game 14 keeps going up from here, then we're in for some good stuff. Reborn is like, it's all right. But then once you get to the end, it's like, okay, this is pretty cool. And then you get to the post game, it's like, oh, this is actually starting to get good now. Okay. And yeah, so, and you have Heavensward for free. You don't have to pay for Heavensward. And I'm gonna be doing Stormblood soon, and Stormblood's also free now. So I'm excited for that. We'll see what happens. I'll make a separate video about Stormblood's story, and yeah. Anyway, so last two things I have is the world and the music. So the world kind of ties into the story. But yeah, so the world of Eorzea, I do remember why I put this one, because in a typical Final Fantasy game, you usually explore the entire planet, or at least in older ones you do. I'd say 1 through 9, you usually explore the entire planet. You'll get an airship and you can go to any continent you want to, and all the different continents have different stuff, or you might get a boat, or you might get different things like that, or a buggy. This is something that 14 doesn't do. At least where I'm up to. I think eventually you're gonna be able to travel to every location, or at least most of them. But where I'm up to, you are based in Eorzea. You're based in this single continent, which is, again, pretty different from how most other classic Final Fantasies work. That's where the world building kicks in. So even though you're in this one continent, there's so much different cultures and races and groups of people that lives in Eorzea that it's like, wow, like you would think this is like the entire, maybe not the entire planet, because there are people from other lands that actually come to Eorzea. There's so much in here to learn about Eorzea alone, especially if you know what happened in 1.0. It's definitely an interesting thing how they kind of rebooted the world, but still kind of carried on plot points from the original game. So it's like, that's kind of interesting how that works. Despite it really being not a full planet like the other ones, they probably arguably have more detail than the other Final Fantasy games. And I think eventually you'll probably be able to explore a lot more places, because with the Heavensward expansion, you've got more sections than you used to. In A Realm Reborn, eventually you kind of end up in a loop where you're kind of going back and forth to different sections you've already been to. But then you get to A Realm Reborn, it's like a whole new area, completely far removed. It's in Eorzea, but it's like a far off area. So it's like, all right, that's good that you get new locations still to explore. And even in this one expansion, you had a good amount of locations. I was kind of afraid at first that for Heavensward, it was like, okay, you get this one new city and then you kind of go back and forth to the same locations in Realm Reborn, but that's not what happened. It was new locations, like 90% new locations. There were certain times where you had to go back to old locations, but it wasn't that much. It was like a rare occasion that you had to do that. Now, last but not least is the music that I want to talk about for the game. So this one I think is an interesting topic. Obviously, music, well, a lot of these things are subjective. It's just a bunch of opinions I'm having, but music is something where it's like one person can listen to one thing and be like, it's amazing. Other person could be like, this is garbage. I know that Final Fantasy 14 is done by Soken, but also a bit of Nobuo Uematsu. So I think for me, the soundtrack has its ups and downs. I wouldn't even really say downs, but like it's just like baseline neutral for me. So I think a lot of like the battle themes are pretty catchy enough, but they're not like super amazing. I wouldn't really go out of my way to listen to it, but in the moment, it's like, all right, cool. You kind of look forward to the battle theme coming on. You might hum a little bit to little thing going on. I think for the most part, the music is like, it's all right. Yeah, again, probably wouldn't listen to it in my own time, but there are certain things, certain boss battle themes where they really start to go in. There's certain remixes of older songs here and there too, but for the most part, it's original music. There are certain boss battles where it really goes in. And I actually really like the Ishgard theme. When you're in the main Ishgard kingdom, that is kind of like an epic theme playing there. So I do really like that. That's probably my favorite area theme at the moment. Some boss fights are like, okay, this is like a standard boss fight music, but certain primals mainly have these really cool boss fight themes that I actually do listen to in my own time. And I think the style of the music is like kind of, I guess this is like the norm for MMO style music. So it's like, I wouldn't say it's really my style. I like more of the classic Final Fantasy sound. I like Uematsu. I like Nobuo Uematsu's music. I like, oh, what's his name? He was on Final Fantasy 10 and 13 and a bit of 7R. Masashi Hamauzu. I more prefer their music. Even, if you want to do Final Fantasy 15, Yoko Shimomura. I overall prefer the music from those games more than 14. This style is definitely not fully my cup of tea, but there are some boss battle themes here and there where it's like, okay, this is actually really, I actually really like this. And I have heard some of the music that Soken did for 16. And I even made like a little short about it, but music for 16 does go crazy. So I think that, and of course, Nobuo can make really good music. So I think for 14, it's just that this is kind of the MMO style of music, and that kind of style is not necessarily my cup of tea. But when it kind of comes out of that style you hear for the most part, it kind of experiments with something else a little bit more. That's when I start to really like it. But yeah, so I hope I was detailed enough in my thoughts on Final Fantasy 14 as a regular Final Fantasy fan. So yeah, overall, I guess to sum it all up, does feel different from Final Fantasy, but I think the gameplay pretty good. It gets better as it goes on. Presentation, I think, could use a little more work, but it might just be the MMO style. Community's great. Story strength is the world and the world building and all that. The worlds are more detailed than regular Final Fantasy, and not only that, but the music is really good at certain points, but just kind of neutral. I'm neutral about it in other points. The characters, they are starting to come into their own. I wouldn't really put any 14 characters above someone like Tidus or Barret or Waka or Celeste or anything like that, but like they're cool enough where they are right now. And again, this is a different thing from normal Final Fantasy, where if you had that one game, like that's it for the characters, so whatever's in there is what they got. This is an MMO with expansion, so they could end up elevating a lot as I get further in the expansion, so we'll see what happens. But that has been my thoughts on Final Fantasy 14. So Final Fantasy fans, MMO fans, let me know what you think about anything I said in here. Does it sound appealing? Does it not sound appealing? And remember, for anyone who's trying to get into it, the game is free up until Stormblood, so that's what I'm doing. I haven't paid any money for the game yet. So you have a really generous amount of time to see if you like 14 or not. So you can give it a try. You won't have all the features when you're on free trial, but you can still do you can do the story at your leisure and all that. So definitely, I think it's worth a try for anyone who'd like to on PlayStation, on PC. I think they're putting it on Xbox right now or soon or something like that. They do like beta tests or whatever. Anyway, so that's gonna be it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Again, if you want more Final Fantasy 14 videos, if you want me to really start like talking about the story, full spoilers, then like let me know. Anyway, I will be seeing you guys next time.